Hi, and happy Monday. My name's Angelica Lamas Baker, and you've stumbled onto my podcast, The Rare Queen Out of the Blue. Hi again. I really hope you guys are having a great Monday. This is Angelica Lamas Baker with The Rare Queen Out of the Blue. So I'm going to jump right into this episode. It's called Let's Talk About the Zebra in the Room. And the reason why I titled this is because if you listen to the previous episode, I introduced myself, and part of introducing myself was letting you know that I'm a rare disease patient advocate, which means I'm a patient and I'm an advocate because I do have a rare condition myself. And I tried to find all kinds of places, or I tried to read the definition of PKU myself several times. And let's be honest with it, it's dry, it's kind of boring, and I couldn't find the groove for me to read it. So what I did find is on the National PKU Alliance's YouTube page, I found a recording where they defined PKU. And so I'm going to play that for you, and then I'm going to actually break it down into understandable and relatable information. So if it's hard for you to understand, or you kind of get lost in the definition, or anything like that, there was an explanation that was given to my husband after giving all these lengthy medical definitions with all these medical terms and things like that, that really helped him understand what PKU was and why it was important. And so after I play this definition for y'all, I will then reiterate in a more story-like form about PKU.
Phenylketonuria, or PKU, is a rare metabolic disease that can lead to severe brain disorders caused by the accumulation of the amino acid phenylalanine to toxic levels in the blood and brain. Amino acids are the basic building blocks that make up proteins. Phenylalanine, or Phe, is one of the essential amino acids. It's necessary for life, but our bodies can't make it. So, phenylalanine must be acquired through foods that contain protein. Normally, once phenylalanine enters the body, most of it is converted to tyrosine by the enzyme phenylalanine hydroxylase. Tyrosine is then turned into neurotransmitters important for normal brain development and function. PKU is an autosomal recessive genetic disorder that affects function of the phenylalanine hydroxylase enzyme. The phenylalanine hydroxylase gene is located on chromosome 12, and over 600 mutations have been described. The degree of enzyme function can vary. When untreated, people with PKU develop symptoms such as severe intellectual disability, psychiatric disorders, and seizures. A pregnant woman with PKU must pay special attention to her phenylalanine levels to reduce the risk of maternal PKU syndrome that can result in heart defects, microcephaly, and developmental disability in her baby. In PKU, elevated phenylalanine levels and reduced tyrosine levels can change the way the brain functions. This is because phenylalanine uses the same transporters to get across the blood-brain barrier as other amino acids, including tyrosine and tryptophan. Tyrosine is needed to synthesize dopamine and norepinephrine, and tryptophan is needed to synthesize the neurotransmitter serotonin. As phenylalanine levels rise, it occupies all transporters, making it hard for tyrosine and tryptophan to get across the blood-brain barrier. As a result, dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin levels in the brain begin to fall, leading to abnormal brain development and intellectual disability. Testing for PKU is typically done as part of routine newborn screening, approximately 24 hours after birth. Screening is done by taking a small blood sample from a heel stick and measuring blood phenylalanine levels by a simple laboratory test. If the screening test shows high levels of phenylalanine and low blood tyrosine, a different method is used to repeat the measurement of the blood amino acids and to confirm the diagnosis. First-line therapy for PKU is the low phenylalanine diet. This includes medical foods, such as low or no phenylalanine medical formulas that are a synthetic form of protein, and foods modified to be low in protein. All high-protein foods, such as meat, fish, eggs, and dairy, are eliminated from the diet. Measured amount of some grains, vegetables, and fruits are allowed, depending on the individual patient's tolerance of small amounts of phenylalanine. Each patient will need to customize the amount of phenylalanine dietary intake with medical professionals according to their individual needs. In addition to the low phenylalanine diet, 2 FDA-approved pharmaceutical treatments are now available: Kuvan is a cofactor for phenylalanine hydroxylase, which helps improve the PKU patient's innate PAH enzyme activity and increase their phenylalanine tolerance. Kuvan must be used in conjunction with the low phenylalanine diet. Palynziq can be used in adults with PKU. Palynziq is an enzyme injected under the skin every day by the patient that circulates in the blood, metabolizing phenylalanine, and substitutes for the defective phenylalanine hydroxylase enzyme. Palynziq works well for many adult PKU patients, but it can have serious side effects in some patients.
Okay, so again, that recording is from the YouTube page for the National PKU Alliance, often referred to as NPKUA, in conjunction, I believe, with NORD, which is the National Organization for Rare Disorders. It is a definition. If you want more information about PKU, NPKUA, what they do, you can find their YouTube page. They are on Facebook, and they're a really great group, and I'm going to talk about them a little bit more. But as I said, I'm going to kind of break this down a little bit. My dean would be told all of this stuff, all these technical terms, and people would try to explain this to him, and he's like, okay, I haven't been around this for 40 years, like my in-laws and my wife and all that, and he never could quite understand it. And then we met a really, really great doctor when I entered a couple of studies to help track executive function and different things like that with adult patients with PKU that have been off treatment. He really helped, Dr. Christ really helped my husband understand and put it into terms he understood. If you're a rare disease patient or PKU patient and you ever have the opportunity to hear Dr. Christ speak, which he did at the NPKUA's conference several years ago, it's wonderful to hear him speak because he doesn't use a lot of medical jargon. He breaks it down so it's really easy for the layman to understand. So my husband is a mechanic by trade. He's a handyman by trade. He does electrical and wiring is his one of his passions in his work. So Dr. Chris really kind of broke it down to him in ways that he could understand using things that he could understand. So basically, with PKU patients, number one, it's a variant. There are no two PKU patients that are alike. As the recording said, there's like 600 mutations. Every PKU patient has a different realm of severity and what their body can tolerate, what it can't tolerate, and it's always a trial and error type of process our entire lives. I do have one of the more severe variants of PKU. As a child and a young child, my phenylalanine range stayed where they want it to be, between 2 and 6. And as I got to be an older kid and things like that, it got into the double digits. No matter how hard we tried, formula, foods, all that sort of stuff, no matter how hard my mom and I tried, we could never get it back down to an acceptable level. So that was part of what led to me kind of leaving treatment. And I'll talk about that after I kind of explain and break down PKU a little bit more. The way he kind of explained it to my husband is that the phenylalanine goes through your bloodstream and ends up in your brain, and your brain is basically like a computer or a stereo, and it has all these wires, and wires have all this insulation called myelin. It's like the insulation for a stereo wire. And what happens to a stereo wire when it sits in water and muck and grime? It gets corroded. The insulated portions eventually get eaten away at, which is what happens with PKU when phenylalanine travels through the bloodstream, ends up in the head, and it sits on those barriers, which are basically neurosynapses, all that sort of stuff, all these wires in your brain. And what it does is it sits there and it corrodes all that insulation, which is the myelin. And what happens when a stereo wire touches another wire or an electrical wire touches another wire? You get a short circuit. That, in a nutshell, is what happens to the PKU brain when it's not being properly treated. And when we have too much phenylalanine in our body, it goes up to our brains. It sits there on all those wires, all that stuff in your brain, eats away at the myelin and all that sort of stuff, and it eventually short circuits our brain, which is what causes the seizures and the tremors and the depression and the mental and emotional issues, all that sort of stuff. So that's basically the easiest way that I can explain PKU. And I hope that you guys understand that. That video was actually very informative, and it is a video. It's not just a verbal recording. So again, It's on the NPKUA, the National PKU Alliance's YouTube page. And if you go to it, you can actually watch the video, and it has graphics and things like that, and it better explains it. So the NPKUA is an organization based out of Wisconsin, and they have board members and people all over the country. Their primary focus is on research and development, and they do an awesome job at what they do. They do have some support systems and organizations for PKU patients and their families. They have predominantly in the past been more geared towards kids with PKU, and they are getting more and more of a shift into trying to help adults with PKU. I am an adult with PKU. I was diagnosed at birth in 1979, which means I am in the tail end of the first generation that was both diagnosed and treated for PKU. And that's like an important little cusp area, because before our generation, you were able to kind of get diagnosed with PKU, but they had no treatment for it. And so what happened is a lot of those patients ended up in institutions, asylums, and things like that. And I don't know if you guys know a lot about the history of mental health, intellectual disabilities, and things like that, but a lot of those people ended up having lobotomies and things like that, which is like tremendously sad. My friend Terry and I, we like to travel, and part of when we travel, we go on those tours because you get a lot of history from those, and a lot of those tend to be in medical facilities or mental institutions or asylums that have been closed down, and it's very heart-wrenching and heartbreaking to read some of the information and go through the plaques and things like that. And Terry's husband, we went to one here in St. Joseph, Missouri, and he sat and read and read and read, and they listed off all the conditions, and PKU was actually listed, and he's like, wait, so like before they would like give you guys lobotomies and stuff, and like he just started crying. Grew up with Michael, we met in high school, and to him it was just hard to understand, and my husband was like, well, yeah, that's what they did, and that's why they developed treatments and things like that, because PKU is one of those conditions that if you're on treatments, you can live a perfectly happy and normal life. Because Michael is one of those people who knew about PKU, learned about it because of me, but it was one of those things that it was. And until he actually saw history of it and the reality of it, it just sort of hits you like a wave. My husband had that experience himself a handful of years ago. We went to a PKU event in Wichita, Kansas. We were able to meet a lovely, lovely woman who was actually in about her 70s, I believe, and it really hurt my husband a lot emotionally, because he had always been told, well, if you're not on treatment and you don't get this treatment and you don't do this, this is what's going to happen to you. And it was kind of when I was starting to really get bad myself for being off treatment, and I was trying to desperately get back on treatment, and things were happening and we couldn't figure out why. And my husband met this woman, and again, she was probably about 70, and she had just been moved into a new nursing facility, and they had found out that she had PKU that had basically never been treated. She'd never been given the right foods or formula or any sort of thing like that. So the nurses in this group home were really desperately out of their own pocket trying to purchase the right foods and medications and things like that that she needed to at least help her. But she actually had the mentality of probably a 9-year-old, I would say, and she was 70, and she was wonderful and sweet and had the best smile, and she was so excited to be there. And when my husband got to the car, he just basically started crying, and he was like, until you see it, it's not a possibility. Like, until you see it, you don't realize what could have been, or basically, but for the grace of God. So that was really kind of hard for us. Grew up having treatment, and I don't want to talk a lot about when I grew up and growing up and how we treated my PK and all that, because my mom really, really would like to, in another episode, address all of that, because as she pointed out when we were kind of talking about this last week, it's her story, like what it was like to raise a PKU patient back in the 80s and 90s, before all these newfangled developments, as she put it. That's her story. Like all those battles that she had with me, all of that's really her her story. So I can't share that because I can't do it justice, because I do have some holes in my memory and some different things that is more what she can offer you than what I can offer you. What I can tell you is that up until I was about in my double digits, my diet was very maintained and tracked. And of course, once you start getting the double digits for girls, hormones and different things start happening and your body starts developing and all that. And it became very hard to keep my PKU in check. And so in my mid to late teens, I really did basically just stop my treatment altogether. I wasn't doing my formula. I was eating cheese and all this sort of stuff that wasn't good for me. I never did really develop the taste for meat. However, now I am eating a little bit of chicken. So it was a combination of that. I wasn't getting my proper nutrition that I needed to. And then also, I wasn't doing my supplements, and my body really wasn't getting the proper nutrition it needed to. So my hair started thinning, and I started developing a lot of health issues. Now, a lot of us PKU adults in this older generation, especially the women, I'm learning, are having some issues with osteoarthritis and things like that because, again, we didn't have all the developments they have now. All the type of formulas. There's basically one, and there was bread in a can and all that sort of stuff. And so we didn't have all these things that kids have nowadays. And we didn't have the vegan movement. And I can almost go anywhere when I travel now and find food, which is like super exciting because that was never a thing when I was a kid. We did not vacation a lot because we were worried about me being able to eat and things like that. Sometimes I didn't sleep over at friends' houses and different things like that. Again, that's for another time. What else can I say about my PKU and my treatment? I have tried pretty much every treatment there is out there for PKU. I did the diet thing when I tried to get back on treatment in my early 20s. We really did do what you call a protein detox, which is basically for a week to 2 weeks. I did nothing but drink my formula, and I tried to detox all of the extra phenylalanine out of my body. That really did not work. It dropped my levels some, but it really did not drop it a lot. My poor doctor felt like he was banging his head against the wall, and I'm like, now you know how I felt for the last handful of years. And then we did try Kuvan, which is mentioned in that recording, and Kuvan was the first FDA-approved prescription drug for PKU. The thing with Kuvan is it works to kickstart the enzyme if you have an enzyme in your body to break down phenylalanine. If the enzyme is not properly working already, it basically kickstarts it. However, if you have a variant of PKU like I do, where you don't have the enzyme already in your body, there's nothing to kickstart, so it's not going to do anything for you. What it did do is act sort of as an antidepressant, and it really did help me a lot emotionally and help my mental stability, but it did not help my levels at all. And I was on, I believe, 20 pills a day of that. We kind of washed our hands of that. Again, that is the first FDA-approved prescription medication. Let me know if the video did talk about the formula. I have done formula all my life until recently, and then of course I wasn't on formula when I was off treatment. But the formula is classified as a DME. If you're familiar with medical terms, a DME is considered durable medical equipment. Basically, it's like a wheelchair if you can't walk. It makes your life more convenient and makes it easier. Isn't necessarily a necessity. Are you going to die without it? Not necessarily. However, quality of life versus quantity of life, and that's where that argument comes in. And that is the argument I use a lot when I go and lobby with Congress and things like that. You need to look at quality versus quantity. I can live a very full life and be a productive member of society as long as I have this formula. But if I don't, this is what's going to happen to me. And I know because I've been on both sides. I have been on the brink of complete and utter mental shutdown and all of that in and out of a wheelchair because my mobility was bad and I was falling and not being able to speak because I started stuttering and tremoring and all that sort of stuff. So I do know what it's like. The last medication that it talked about was Palynziq, which is an injection, and I like to equate it to, and how I explain it to people, is Palynziq is to a PKU like insulin is to a diabetic. It's not the same. However, It allows us to eat more liberally and do things like that. So it says that it's only for adult patients, which is true. They are only currently letting adults have it because it is a whole induction process to your body. Palynziq is what I'm on now. I was very blessed that my poor doctor and medical team, like I said, were banging their head against the wall, and then we heard about the PEG-PAL trials, which then turned into Palynziq. I was able to eke in to the trials at the last week that they were taking people. So I had been on this medication for almost, I believe, 6 to 7 years now. When I went into the study, I was, as I said, having mobility issues. I had a severe stutter. I had a tremor. I was not driving. I definitely was confused all the time. I'm a completely different person now. And what it is it's an injection of a synthetic enzyme that is plant-derived that replaces the enzyme that I'm missing. It did take almost 5 years for it to actually become effective with my level. And my theory on that is it chipped away at all that excess phenylalanine I had in my body to help my body work through all that excess first. And then now it's working on the real-time phenylalanine that I'm putting into my body. What do I have to say about that? I actually started feeling so much better emotionally and mentally and almost physically before the manifestation of the difference of levels that I was feeling happened. So I actually was doing better before my levels reflected that I was doing better. And I did have all of the full boat of side effects. If you're a PKU patient or a PKU parent or something reading about Palynziq and wondering about it, and let me explain to you, I did have every side effect they say that you can get with Palynziq, including the anaphylaxis, on multiple occasions. Why did I stay on it? Because honestly, it was our final hope. It was the last hope. I was feeling better, and I didn't know what else to do. And as I had said before, and I have told people, it really wasn't about me. It was about future generations and being able to help PKU patients other than myself. We really didn't know what to do. Fast forward to now, I am still on Palynziq. I was on the highest dosage that they do prescribe for a very, very, very long time, which is 40 milligrams. We actually, in the last 2 months, have dropped it down to 20 milligrams because now it's working too well. I am able now, when I started the study, I was eating about 5 to 10 grams of protein a day liberally. If I was being liberal, it was 10 grams, but it was 5 grams of protein is what they wanted me when I started the study. I am now up to about 80 to 100 grams of protein a day. I do not do my formula now, which is kind of super exciting. Not that it tastes horrible. It's just nice not to have to carry it around with me every day. I am eating cheese. I am eating eggs. I am eating more healthier than I was before. I can get into my diet and wedge into my diet chicken. I can tolerate chicken. However, red meats, pork, fish, definitely no fish or seafood because I have allergic reaction to that. But my body cannot tolerate those things. That being said, everybody's probably listening to this who doesn't have PKU, doesn't know a whole lot about metabolics and things like that. They're probably 100 grams of protein. That seems like a lot. Actually, they say 0.3 grams of protein per pound of weight that you are. So 100 to 150 grams of protein a day for the average person is just about right. Now, when I started the study, and I was only eating the 5 grams of protein, if you take a normal McDonald's cheeseburger, just the cheeseburger itself, that was basically 2 to 3 days worth of food for me. That's all I could eat. That's the only way I can kind of equate that in your mind, is if you start looking at the packaging of the food you eat and you look at the protein intake. So the rule of thumb for a PKU patient is as long as you learn a lot about reading labels. So as long as the protein in grams say less than 4 grams of protein per serving, that's probably okay for a PKU patient. Not saying that it is okay, I'm just saying that it probably is. That was always the rule of thumb that we were taught growing up. So a lot of my friends will read packaging. If you ever meet us, you ever go out to public with us, you ever eat, it is an old habit. We look at things, how much protein is in that per serving. If you also look at labels, especially if you look at diet soda, gum, all that sort of thing, you're going to see those warning labels on there, caution, phenylketonuria axis. this has phenylalanine in it because all of your artificial sweeteners contain phenylalanine. So all those things are not allowed in my home. They're not good for you. They're not allowed in this house. With that being said, there's a lot of meat in my house because my husband is very much an extreme meat eater. He likes to eat. He likes to grill. So yeah, there is a lot of trying to sometimes juggle preparation of two meals in our house. However, since we've gotten married, he actually does try to eat a little less of the red meats, and he really does eat more of your plant-based protein substitutes. He is like an uber fan of jackfruit. Uh, you get that a lot in Kansas City. Actually, there's a lot of barbecue places that now do jackfruit. He's also an uber fan of like mushrooms that are marinated correctly and then grilled as a meat substitute, and beans and things like that. He's always super excited when he goes to the grocery store and he finds a new protein substitute, and we definitely try it. So that's kind of my experiences with my PKU as far as like now the community. What I do have to say about the community is it's grown leaps and bounds since I was a kid. Like, I remember as a kid, my clinic put together a PKU picnic at least once a year. And then HIPAA came out, and then they couldn't do that. And then there was like none of that. And then the internet came out and Facebook. And now we're able to connect with people worldwide. To give you a little bit of perspective, about 1 in 15,000 babies in the United States are born with PKU. That means approximately now there's about 16,500 PKU patients in the United States alone. There's not very many where I live. There's not very many where other people live. While there is more and more we meet, it's usually kids and parents of PKU patients. And we do meet a handful of other adults. I meet a lot more adults that are struggling with trying to get back on diet or trying to maintain their treatment regimen than I do adults that have been diehard PKU patients their entire lives. With that being said, that is typically in the 30 and older crowd that have the issue. Usually under 30, they're not struggling as hard because it has been a diet for life. When I was a kid, they kind of told us, well, when she gets into her teens, she won't have to follow the diet very much. When she's an adult, she's not going to have to follow it at all. However, we have learned as medical sciences have improved and changed and grown that your brain continues to grow, your body continues to grow, to change. And so in 2007, they instituted the treatment diet for life. Let me put that into perspective. I was born in 1979, and not until 2007 did the American Medical Association institute diet for life, or PKU. That's a lot of years. If you meet an older PKU patient, I promise you at some point in their life they have struggled. They may be on treatment now, or they may be off treatment, or they may be struggling to maintain treatment. And if you are one of those patients and one of those people listening right now, let me explain to you, it's okay. Take it one day at a time. Very much take it like you're an addict that is involved in a 12-step program, one day at a time, and count your blessings. There's a lot to be said about waking up, saying 3 gratitudes every day and starting your day off in a positive light. Just because you made a mistake yesterday doesn't mean you're going to make the same mistake again today. So do not get discouraged. Again, the community has grown so much. I have friends all over the country and all over the world now, or PKU family, as we refer to each other, in England, in Utah. Hi, Jen. I know you're listening to this. Utah, Tennessee, with some other people. I'm not going to use like everybody's names just because Florida, I know Moya and Greg are listening, and yeah, I'm going to say your name, Moya and Greg. I love them dearly. Maybe one day I can get them on the podcast, like to interview if I get down to Florida, soon to the Tampa area. But Moya and Greg are actually a PKU couple that are married that met through their clinic, and I love them to death. But anyway, I have friends and family all over the world, PKU. I'm okay with that. When I was a kid, I felt like I was alone, and I was. I'm not, because I know that they're there. Jen knows that 9 times out of 10, she can message me any time of day, and I'll sit down and kind of chat with her on Facebook, or if she wants to talk, we can talk. I know I haven't been as present as I usually am with Jen, but I've also been kind of working on this podcast and a few other projects, and she's been very supportive in all of those projects, and I appreciate that. So that's how the community has grown. I do love the work that NPKUA does. They are great. They were started by parents of PKU patients. Again, their primary focus has been R&D, which is research and development for new treatments and a cure for PKU. They have some scholarship funds, and they have a conference typically every 2 years, and all this. And I love what they do. What I need to say about that is I have had the honor of meeting pretty much everybody on the board. I've lobbied with them and gotten to know them. Again, their focus has primarily been kids. Up until a handful of years now, they've really tried to shift focus and help and expand for support systems for adults with PKU and helping patients stay on track or get back on track. And I appreciate that. I totally do. That being said, we don't necessarily always see eye to eye politically and in the way that they portray PKU necessarily, because I have been one of those people who have been to the brink and come back. I don't always paint a rosy picture of PKU, and I don't always think that using the kids with PKU in lobbying and different things like that is good. Because number one, unless they're a certain age, they don't really understand the ramifications. Number two, you're putting kids in the spotlight, again, that don't understand the ramifications. And as a person who has put themselves out there in the spotlight, you kind of get to a zone where you go to conferences and things like that, and people know you. And as a person who has anxieties and social anxieties, that's hard because they want to hug you, they want to be around you, they want you. And I don't necessarily, because of my PKU and things like that, I'm not always quote unquote on. I made the choice to put myself out here. Those kids don't necessarily make the choice, and they really can only tell things that have been told to them. They can't really say from their own experiences yet, other than I go to school and I feel alone. And I feel for those kids. But as an adult, I've been there, I've been to the brink, and I've been back, and I've made the choice to put myself out there. I'm okay with that. That's probably why you're also not going to hear me use names a lot when I talk about my PK friends. I can say Jen because I know that Jen is listening to this. I know that she is very much a supporter of what I do. And other than that, I respect the privacy of my PKU family. If they say I can use their names, if they say I can, I will. I do a lot of work with the National Organization for Rare Disorders, or NORD, which is more of an all-inclusive rare disease organization, charity. And the reason why is when I started my pageantry and stuff, I approached some other organizations that had to do primarily with PKU, and I was told, sure, you can fundraise for us, but don't use our name, don't say you're associated with us, don't do this, and don't do that. Basically, they did not want my name associated with them. I'm not sure how that works. But NORD has very much embraced me and encouraged me in every step of the way. So I do a lot of work with them. What I will tell you is that a lot of times when you hear me talk about my PKU, you hear me refer to it as a condition as opposed to a disease or a disorder. And I guess, why is that? That's the big question, because in the PKU community, there's like this big infight of, is it a disease? Is it a disorder? Well, back up, y'all, and get a dictionary, because disease and disorder are the same thing. They are literally used to define each other in the dictionary. They are synonyms. Also, when you think of disease, you think of a negative connotation. Disease and disorder leave negativity in your mind, and it's about mindset. PKU treatment and lifestyle and being a part of the community is very much a mindset situation. When you say the word disease, and I have this disease, people immediately think something negative, and you're gonna die, or you caught something. Same with disorder. There's something wrong with you, and I don't want that. When I got into my PKU, back into diet, back onto treatment, and I really started developing my writing and what I wanted to do for the PKU community, how I wanted to help, the majority of it was the mindset of the PKU patient, especially the patient that struggles so much like I did. and tries so hard and was told so many times, you're a lost cause, give up, whatever, damage is done, nobody's ever going to want to marry you, especially if they know what's wrong with you, all this sort of stuff. But there's nothing wrong with me. My PKU is a condition. That is the reason why I use condition. Condition refers to a state of being. It just is. A condition, it just is. It is a state in which you live, a state in which exists. It is a condition of my life. It is not a disease. It is not a disorder. To me, it is just a condition and a way of my life. I've always had it. I'm always going to be. I guess when I think about that, I think about when people like, I want to cure this, and I want to cure it, and I want to like, because there is a treatment out there that's a liver transplant. Like, we can transplant your liver and you'll be cured of your PKU. And now they're trying to do genetic therapy and things like that. And my mom and I got to talk about this a lot. And while I understand, I really, but my PKU is not going to kill me. And that good liver may go to someone who actually will die without that liver. And I cannot in good conscience do that. Genetic therapy. And I guess that delves on my thoughts on being created and creation and all that sort of stuff. While I find it to be good for some people, and that's okay, you are messing with the very fiber of my being, and God made me the way that He made me for a reason. You may not understand it, and I may not understand it at the time, but there's a reason behind it. And to change that changes one of the essences of me that makes me unique. I'm not saying that if you go these routes, you're a bad person. It is just not for me. My husband and I struggled a lot when I got into the Palynziq studies. And again, I had every full boat of side effect, including the anaphylaxis that happens with it. My mom got to a point where she was struggling with me doing the treatments because she did not want to see me suffer the way that I was suffering. However, I said to her, did you prefer to see me in a wheelchair and unable to speak? And she's like, no. Okay, well, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But the Palynziq is a plant-derived version of the enzyme, so it's kind of natural. It is made in a lab, obviously, but it's not changing any part of me that is, in essence, me. My husband worried a lot when I got back on treatment, and when I talked about getting back on my treatment, about how much it was going to change me, and if I were healthier and if I were a quote-unquote different person, would I still want to be with him? He very quickly learned I'm quirky and kind of nuts regardless. My being on treatment just made me a little bit sharper and able to assert myself. And while that is okay, I'm also learning sometimes it's not okay to assert yourself. Sometimes you really actually do need to assert yourself more. And I am more on the I don't assert myself enough a lot of times. With that being said, my husband met me right after I got out of an abusive relationship. I have noticed echo throughout our community, and I'm not just going to say this on the female end of it, I've also seen this in the male end of it, that we tend to settle for someone who's not good for us, who is toxic, because we think that is the best that we are going to get. Now, is my husband a saint? Trust me, if you've ever met him, if you've ever talked to him, if you've ever heard his story, he's not a saint. But my husband does the best that he can do with me. And the only way I can equate that is he quit a normal job to basically become self-employed and work as a handyman because he could make more money. And we couldn't get insurance to pay for my medication. We couldn't get insurance to pay for my formula at all. And we were paying all out of pocket. And you're talking at the very least $500 a month. I need special foods and healthier foods, fresh produce and protein, plant-based protein substitutes and stuff. And that stuff is expensive. A box of low protein. So there was really, he made a big sacrifice to do that, which means now he doesn't have health insurance and he bears the full weight of our financial income. So there's that. My husband does go to as many functions as he can when it's PKU or rare disease related, but because he is self-employed, he doesn't make it to a lot of stuff. That doesn't mean that he's not supporting me emotionally and financially, all that sort of stuff. He so most definitely is. I doubt that you will ever be anywhere with me where the phone doesn't ring and my husband isn't checking on me. That being said, a lot of us tend to get in these toxic relationships because it is the best that we think that we can get, and we are raised to believe that there is something wrong with us and that nobody is ever going to love us. And that is not saying that your parents are outright saying that to you. They may be the most encouraging people that you've heard of, but have you ever heard of toxic positivity? It's totally a thing to where you're so supportive it becomes toxic. And when you say things that you believe are supportive, but they root in somebody's head as something negative. We are raised by societal standards to believe that there is something wrong with us. This is not just PKU patients. This is rare disease as a whole. Rare conditions as a whole. Now, there are some rare conditions and diseases that are deadly and that they need a cure and they need these things, but there are some that you can live with them as long as they are treated and you can be productive members of society and do whatever it is that you dream to be. But society as a whole tells us there is something wrong with us because we have this condition and the state of being that is the minority in the world. And let me explain to you, and it took me a really long time to wrap my head around, there is nothing wrong with me. I was made the way that I was made for a reason. I have a very, very large family. My mom's family's Italian, Irish, French. I mean, we're East Coast, old school, Catholic. There's so many of us. And my dad's family is Mexican. And again, there's so many of us. And I am the only one on record in our family that have this condition. I'm made this way for a reason. Do I say that this was an easy road? No. I know it was hard on my mom. I know it was hard on my dad. I know it's hard on my husband and my stepdaughter. I know that it was hard on my brother growing up. And I don't talk a lot about my brother because my brother needs to be my brother, not be Angie's caregiver and not always worry about what Angie's doing. And that was a very big part of his life growing up. Is my relationship with my husband easy? It is not easy because there are those days that he can tell that my level is not right. Either it has completely tanked because of the balancing or it has completely skyrocketed for some reason or another. And he knows that I am an emotional and mental wreck. And because my level has leveled off and it is where it's supposed to be, you can definitely tell those days that I'm off. And those are the days where he has to kind of take a step back and say, there's something not right with you. We need to figure out what's wrong. Either you need to eat more or you need to do something. And 9 times out of 10 lately, it's you need to eat more protein because it's very hard for a person who was eating 10 grams of protein a day for however long to go all the way to 100 grams a day. It's basically force feeding yourself. I do struggle with my weight. I said that on the last podcast, on my last episode, that I am 208 pounds. And I said, okay, I don't want a bunch of stuff saying that's overweight. I'm aware, but when you go from 230 at your peak and now you're 208, it is something to celebrate, especially when your diet is mostly carb and sugar based because of your condition. Now that I am able to eat a little bit of chicken, a little bit more protein, I am definitely working on trying to get down. My goal weight at this point is 175, which is what I was when we got married 18 years ago. That is kind of in a nutshell how I feel. I don't want you to believe there is something wrong with you because I have learned a lot. Am I an expert? I don't think I'm an expert. I know what works for me. And I know when I talk to other PKU patients and adults who struggle, when I say it's really a mindset. Why do you think there's something wrong with you? There's nothing wrong with you. Think about it this way. It is not. It is just a condition and a state of being, and that there's nothing wrong with you. I had the opportunity earlier this year, for the first time ever, to speak at my church. One of our pastors is really big into the Sanctity of Life month and movement, and of course, he speaks a lot about against abortion and stuff like that. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to get political. However, I approached him, and my husband was kind of like, I think that you need to talk to somebody from the other end of the spectrum who had a special need growing up and felt useless, and now there are countries trying to terminate pregnancies for babies that may possibly be born with certain conditions and things like that, because it may be a problem and we don't know if it is. Why don't you speak to somebody who is an adult now and able to express the importance of it? So I'm going to play that for you guys, and that's going to kind of be my wrap up for this episode. I don't think I said all the things I wanted to say. I also don't want this to get terribly, terribly, terribly long. I'm going to be talking about my PKU, my experiences, the community, all that sort of stuff, all throughout this podcast adventure. How long it's going to go, I don't know. My mom keeps asking, like, how long does a podcast go? I've listened to one that started back in, 2014 and is still going strong. So I don't know. I don't know where this is going to go. This is not the last time that I'm going to talk about my PKU. I will tell you that I do have new friends and family. I always say family. I do have new family all across the globe, honestly, that are new to PKU, new to rare disease community, all that sort of stuff. And that's kind of why I wanted to do this particular podcast. Number one, to talk to other PKU patients out there and families and to get a little bit of a different perspective. Number two, to introduce some of the new people in my life to PKU and rare disease. And I guess I will end my portion of this with number one, remember there's nothing wrong with you. You were made the way that you're made, and that's okay. Number two, we are called zebras because there is an old adage that was used when a particular professor and doctor was talking to his class of medical students, and he was saying that when diagnosing somebody and exploring options, when you hear hoof prints, think horses, not zebras. Obviously, because horses are more common than zebras. And the rare disease community took that as a challenge and has now made the zebra our international mascot, because there are zebras that exist in the world, and sometimes we do exist. And while that is a good theory to have, that you shouldn't be looking to get your name in a medical book by discovering this thing, do remember zebras do exist. Number three, I want to thank you all very much for listening. Next week, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to talk about yet. Mom's kind of itching to get behind the microphone and see what this whole situation is all about. And I know that at least two of her sisters, Doris and Judy, listen. So maybe we'll get Mom behind the microphone. I don't know. So I hope you all have a good week and enjoy the rest of this podcast, which is going to be, it was pre-recorded at my church earlier this year. And I hope you enjoy it. Have a great week. And I'll talk to you guys next Monday.
Last week was Sanctity of Life Sunday, and I spoke on not only protecting the unborn, but the trend in our nation is towards euthanasia. Canada is already killing a lot of terminally ill people before they want to be killed, before they want to die, and we don't want that to come to our nation. There are instances already, though, where hospitals have refused treatment to children born with disabilities because they decided that they weren't worth trying to save against parents' wishes, even. So there is a spirit attacking our culture, a spirit of death, and we want to stand for that. We're very thankful that President Trump was the first president to appear in person at the March for Life, and he spoke very eloquently on protecting the unborn and how precious every life is. So Angie has something to share with us that relates to adults with disabilities. So she decided it'd be a good time to follow up what I spoke on last week with that. So Angie, take it away.
Okay.
All right, so yeah, like Pastor Richard said, he's been doing a series on the sanctity of life. It's basically about what most people would call special needs children, and the movement across the world, basically to get rid of what a lot of people view as a burden on society. So I just thought I'd help him wrap it up from the perspective of one of those broken children. So, my mom has often said when I speak openly that maybe I should start with a few disclaimers because a lot of people don't know me, don't know my personality, and it just works better that way. So number one, I ask you to remember I am slightly brain damaged, so some of my thoughts and words can be a little jumbled. They don't make sense sometimes, but I assure you, if you be patient, it'll all come together in the end. I promise. Maybe. I don't. And number two, I've recently been informed this year by some of my family, they're kind of afraid of me. I tend to be, I don't have a filter, and I'm a little bit overly assertive, or as Sandy likes to say, very passionate. So some of this is going to sound a little harsh to everyone, but it's not meant to reprimand you. It's meant for you to look at things from a different perspective. So I'll start with an introduction because a lot of you also don't know who I am, why I can talk on this subject, and why it's very important to me. My name's Angelica Lamas Baker, and I was born in July of 1979 with a rare genetic condition called phenylketonuria, or PKU for short, which means, in my case, I don't have the enzyme in my liver to break down the amino acid phenylalanine, which is found in most foods. Your body breaks that up, and it turns it into an essential building block for your body and your mind called tyrosine, and that's where you get your executive function, your emotions, all of that from. My body doesn't do that. So, it's very important to understand that I was born in the tail end of the first generation that was both treated and diagnosed for PKU. Treated is the essential word here, because left untreated, PKU can cause irreparable brain damage. There are now believed to be in the United States 1 in every 10 to 15,000 babies have PKU. There are 7,000 rare diseases known in the world today. It's also believed that there are now an estimated 25 to 30 million rare disease patients in the United States alone, which is comparable to the entire recorded populations of the nations of Australia, Venezuela, and Ghana. I'm a rare disease advocate. When you put those numbers into perspective, I am a voice of a nation. When I'm not here, I'm in Washington, D.C., or somewhere else in the United States, talking about rare disease and special needs people in both traditional and non-traditional venues. I speak for those who cannot speak for themselves for one reason or another. Either they cannot, won't, or they're not even alive to. This is also a nation that Pastor Richard feels very passionate about. So, I'm here to talk to you today to better understand it from a little bit of a different perspective, from someone who's been in the inside and we're looking out. Pastor Richard has brought up in his message over the last few weeks about places like Europe and Canada and other countries that the statistics for children born with special needs and various conditions are drastically decreasing because they check for these conditions while the baby is still in the womb. The problem is those tests are not 100% accurate. So their theory is to eliminate a problem before it becomes a problem, possibly. Now, how does that relate to you and me? How can we put a stop to this movement and help preserve the sanctity of life by the actions as Christians? Now, the first thing that most Christians in general say to me when I tell them or my family tells them about my PKU is, I'll pray for you to be healed from your disease, or I'll pray for your family to be relieved of this burden. For the love of all that's holy, stop. Don't say this, and I'm going to give you 3 reasons why. Number 1, as a child or teenager or a parent of a special needs kid, you don't know what damage that does to our psyche. The human psyche is just that. It's the soul, the mind, and the spirit of you. Now, as an adult, I can understand the perspective. It's kind of like when someone dies and you say, my thoughts and prayers are with your family. It's what you say when you don't know what to say, but you want to be empathetic. I get it. Number two, by saying this, you are adding credit to the argument of those that believe the problem should be eliminated before it possibly becomes a problem. Albeit you are mostly unaware that you're saying this or that you're conveying this, but you're doing that. And number three, you are effectively and openly challenging a creation of God. Let me pose a scenario for you. You're a parent, and your child comes home crying because the schoolyard bully has made fun of their hair or their freckles or some other appearance on their body. What do you tell them as a parent? You tell them that God made you and you are beautiful. All of God's creations and creatures are beautiful. You are perfect the way that God made you. And that's based on, obviously, the psalm that Pastor Richard has brought up many times, Psalm 139, 13 through 16. I'm not going to read it. You guys know it. You love it. He's read it a lot. It's pretty simple, right? My PKU is just much a part of me as your child's hair and freckles. It is rooted in my DNA. It is genetic. It is woven into the very fiber of my being. I have this scripture address tattooed on my thigh with the words PKU to remind me of two things. There is nothing wrong with me. I am how God made me, and God does not make mistakes. And number two, I have a purpose and I have a future. You may not understand it, I may not understand it, but it's there. If you feel the need to pray for us, pray for understanding, pray for the spirit of perseverance, and pray for patience. I'm going to leave you with 3 more scriptures that I'd like you to go home and meditate on, read over. And if you do, tell me how you think they relate to special needs families and children and what they say to you. Proverbs 38, the whole thing. Romans 12, 1 through 8. And Matthew 5, 2 through 11, the Beatitudes.